Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all five names for all the ancestors. And today we're continuing our series highlighting the restorative justice work by the practitioners in Florida in the South in efforts to support the 2023 Down South Restorative Justice Conference, RJ the Remix, Exploring, Living, and Expanding Restorative Justice, happening October 20 through 22nd in Orlando, or just outside of Orlando. If you want to learn more about that, links to that in the description. But today, we're so honored to be in the presence of somebody who's been doing restorative justice in so many different aspects. But as always, we're going to let them introduce themselves. So, Ruth, welcome to This Restorative Justice Life. Who are you?
Ooh, David. I am Ruth Ifakemi, Efungbemi, Ajewole, Ajeleti, Ifaloro, Jeannoel. So I share all of my names because I carry so much of my ancestors with me too.
Who are you?
I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be on with you today. I am a mother. I am a wife. I have three beautiful children.
Who are you?
I am present. I am here. I am a student of life. And I say that because there's so many lessons that I've had to learn on this journey of life. Um, and being a student, at the very least of it, helps me to know that I can keep going.
Absolutely. Who are you?
Ooh, now it's getting deeper. um, I am wealth, and I am my ancestors' wealth in water, in consciousness, in time, in currency.
Mm. Who are you?
I am a practitioner. I practice, at least I try my best to practice what I preach.
Who are you?
I am the daughter of Maurice, who is the daughter of Sesafi, who is from a long history lineage of Haitians who believe in Black liberation so much that in 1804 we fought to become the first Black nation in the Western Hemisphere.
And finally, for now, who are you?
I am a child of Olodumare. I am a child of the water, of the fire, of the earth, of the wind. And I'm here. I'm ready and I'm present.
Beautiful, beautiful. There are so many intersections of who you are that we're going to get to over the course of our conversation. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to also open our space. And so, in the way that you'd like to, I pass the talking piece to you.
So, the offering that I have for us today is a Sacred Ori affirmation card deck. This is a card deck that I worked with several artists, including Gina Cherry, Sage Satori, who's down here in South Florida, to produce. And it was with Four Together, who's based in California, and also Fanm Saj, based in Miami. And so I'm going to invite everybody to just be present as much as we can and take a deep cleansing breath through our nose and exhaling out. Taking another deep breath in through your nose and exhaling out. And taking one more deep breath in through your nose and exhaling out. And the card itself is called the Sacred Ori affirmation card deck. And our Ori in the Yoruba language is our inner head. And this is what we say guides us on this earth. Everywhere we go, we have our Ori. And so it's always beautiful to affirm ourselves. And so that's where we get the sacred Ori affirmations. So I'm going to shuffle the deck and I'm going to cut it in half. Ashe. Wow. The card that I pulled for us is the transformation card. It's the number 15, and in the background of the card, you see a sun at the top. There's sunflowers in the background, and there's a woman who is pregnant, holding a baby with a puff hairstyle. Um, and gold, look like yellow or gold hoop earrings. And the card itself is transformation number 15. So I'm going to read from the card deck and then invite you all to do the affirmation with me. Okay. So, number 15, transformation. Freedom cannot be bought, sold, or bartered. You are on fertile ground, and what you're carrying will soon be birthed, whether it's a new idea, new project, or new awakening. You determine for yourself what it means and how it feels to be free. And we must have the freedom to raise what and whom we birth in safe and healthy environments. No matter what you decide freedom means for you, know that it cannot be bought, sold, or bartered. Be free. Ashe. So now, David, I'll invite you and everyone listening, I'll invite you to hold your ori with two hands. If this is the first time that you're doing this, like today, you could say thank you. Because most of the time we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened, right? We're always doing that, right? But we're just going to say thank you to your own ori. So you'll repeat after me. Ori,
Ori,
please elevate me
please elevate me
to a deeper knowing
to a deeper knowing
that freedom
that freedom
cannot be bought,
cannot be bought,
sold,
sold,
or bartered.
or bartered.
Help me to remember
Help me to remember
that I have all that I need
that I have all that I need
to sweeten my life
to sweeten my life
and destiny from within.
and destiny from within.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe. So that is our card. Even as we start this conversation today, that's the card that we have for us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that opening, for that sharing. It leaves a very fertile ground for us to highlight your story, the work that you've done, and it spanned so many things across the work that we call quote unquote restorative justice. But before
Yeah.
we dive into that, it's always good to check in, right? We've been talking for a little bit now, but for the audience here, for our community members who are listening, to the fullest extent that you want to answer the question, how are you feeling right now?
Yeah. So, thank you for asking me how I'm doing. So today I am doing good. I'm returning from It's summer has ended for us. We're parents. And school started last week. And so for a period of time, we were traveling. We went to Nigeria to that I'm gonna talk. I'll share more about that trip because that was very transformative for me and my whole family. That was the first time I went outside of the country, and it was to the motherland, to Nigeria. So I feel very privileged and honored. And for that, I'm coming in really grateful to have this conversation with you. Education in Florida right now as a parent is, um, there's so much to consider, and so with everything that's going on, it's always important to kind of highlight the work that we are doing to be able to confront what is happening within our education movement, within our communities, within Black communities. But for this present moment, I'm doing good, and I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I love it. And, I think we can get into that piece now of like, this framework of these conversations about doing the work in the South, in Florida specifically, for the past couple of conversations we've had, it's not a landscape that many might think is conducive to doing restorative justice work. It's true that wherever there are oppressive forces, there are people who are struggling against. There are always people, and historically, Black people working for, our collective liberation. How, gratitude and presence and hope and optimism abound in this moment, and maybe coming off of that trip. How do you maintain that energy in the land of Ron DeSantis, right?
Mhm.
And don't say gay bills and anti-CRT bills and like book bans and all of that happening in the schools and the ripple effects that has on communities.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of work that we have to do. The first thing that I inclined to share is paying homage to my ancestors. I pay homage to my Ori. I thank God and I thank Olodumare. I thank my godmother Ifawoyi. I thank my husband Mark Maka, and I thank my children, and I thank my community for being persistent, for being determined to actually say we're not going to give up, right? We're not giving up on ourselves, we're not giving up on each other, even if the outside world is going to give up on Florida or us, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not giving up on each other. But the way that I think one of the ways I would say to stay present, to stay optimistic, and to do this work is to connect back to our ancestors, right? And to connect back to the work that they do and that they've left us to do. Um, I think that is one way that we do it, right? Is to be able to kind of be in gratitude and to remember the work that they've done that has led us here. Something that I think about every day that I wake up is there's so many of our ancestors who um, chose actually to not continue, right? And so we pay homage to them. There's so many of our ancestors that were forced to come here, that was stolen from their land, that lost their identities, right? That now we're able to like remember. So now our work is to be able to reclaim a lot of the journeys that they've gone through and to re-understand and remember what our responsibility is. And we can't do that by ourselves. I can't do that by myself. I have to do that with my family. I have to do that with my temple, my spiritual home. And I have to do that with ritual, right? I have to do that in understanding that um, there's so many people, there's so many forces that actually are like, Florida is underwater. Forget about Florida. Education is not the thing here. Like, forget about it, right? But for us who are here, we have to continue to fight. And for me, it's like doing the fighting is creating alternatives to what currently exists. Whether that's restorative justice circles or transformative justice processes, we're going to keep doing the alternative.
Yeah, the ability to maintain hope, right? Miriam Kaba says hope is a discipline, and you know, she's not the first to voice that, but the idea that like this is ongoing work that we are carrying on for the ancestors who jumped off of slave ships, right? Um, because they thought that death was better than a life of bondage. To those that survived and experienced horror upon horror through chattel enslavement on the land that we call United States, on different islands across the Caribbean, all across this now Western hemisphere, right? There are lots of ways that our people, people who are stolen from Africa, who have suffered and have also been indoctrinated into white supremacy, right? Um, and this is an ongoing healing journey that does not end with legislation about a specific set of curriculum, about a specific way of teaching a subject in school, right? There are deeper things than that, and remembering the long journey that we're all on, right? Whatever your ancestry, the long journey towards liberation requires that hope and conscious work, and connecting back to that in whatever way is meaningful for you, doesn't necessarily have to be the way that we talked about here, is really helpful, is really helpful. And so, there's a lot of work that you've done around restorative justice. There's a lot of work that you're continuing to do in community and schools, but we often like to start this conversation with a question. You've been doing this work for a long time, but probably before you even knew the words restorative justice. So, from your perspective, how did this get started for you?
Yeah, young people, Black and brown youth, were
Hmm.
getting suspended and arrested for really minor infractions in schools. Um, and I remember, so I moved from Boston to Miami, and I was looking to organize. I was organizing in Massachusetts, and when I moved, I was like, I want to continue to organize. And somebody linked me up with the Power Youth Center for Social Change.
Hmm.
And when I got there, I saw young people in circle, and they were talking about their experiences, talking about their stories, all of the things that they were facing in schools. And I was like, wow, this was really beautiful. Like I really enjoyed the storytelling aspect of it, right? Um, and then a couple weeks after that, I learned that it was a campaign that they were doing. That they were saying, actually, what we were doing in the office is what we want in schools. So
Hmm.
instead of students getting suspended and arrested, for really minor infractions, that we want to be able to hold circles for them to be able to share their side of the story. And I remember sitting in circle and even talking about my own experiences while I was in school. And I was like, wow, I wish that I had restorative justice circle keeping in schools when I was in school.
Hmm.
Because there had been so many instances where I won't talk about all the things, right? But or maybe the small things, but um yeah, to be honest, like there's been so many instances that I've thought of, and I'm like, wow, like if only I had somebody to talk to, or if only I was able to share my side of the story, maybe my healing journey would have begun, right? Or if only I had a chance to like sit in a circle, maybe I wouldn't have gotten into a fight with that girl, for whatever the reason, right?
Yeah.
So there's so many things that kind of brought that back to me, of like understanding restorative justice as a storytelling tool, a community building tool, and an alternative for incarceration and zero tolerance policies. And from there, that campaign was a 10-year long campaign. So we're dealing, like in the South, when we're trying to do racial justice, education justice, reproductive justice work, um, things that may kind of, in the Northeast, like, or in the West, may take 5 years, take longer down here. There's a lot of
Hmm.
shifting of culture that we have to do. There's a lot of um, policy shifts and conversations that we have to have with people, including young people and their parents, around what does this actually look like. And so the campaign was one, and we were able to get restorative justice in schools because of young people, because of parents, and really because of a long history of understanding that this was not okay and that we needed something new. Right. And so a lot of like the campaign winning too, unfortunately, came after the brutal murder of Trayvon Martin, where young people took over the state capitol and wanted to activate Trayvon's law. And restorative justice was a part of that legislative policy that we wanted, which also forced the president at that time, President Obama, to push the initiative of My Brother's Keeper. And so, even around that time of pushing My Brother's Keeper and Trayvon's law, my work, was really also thinking about this as, okay, let's talk about not just how the school to prison pipeline is impacting Black boys, but how is this also impacting Black girls and gender nonconforming young people? And that's where we started the Black Girls Matter Coalition. And so, all of this time, we were doing circles, right? Restorative justice, we were practicing them in the schools and outside of the communities, but the largest test for me came when it was like, I don't want to just have a tool and give it to the state and we don't know how to use the tool. We don't know how to practice it. We don't know it.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was when we invited Sujata to come down to train us to become circle keepers. And then she did another training for us to become trainers. Um, so that was around 2015, where I was trained to become a restorative justice circle keeper and trainer and train others to hold circles. So it's been a long journey. It's been a beautiful journey, exciting journey. And then there's been a lot of times where I would say um, we utilize restorative justice as a tool, right? Not just for restorative justice, but really for community accountability. And for me, and also for ancestral venegration and ancestral healing, right? And so for me, it's been a beautiful journey, but also a deep spiritual practice to be able to practice RJ.
Yeah. The risk of asking that question is always that there's so much that I want
Yeah.
to unpack from all of those things. And I want to go back to the beginning, right? When you talked about coming from the Northeast to South Florida, right? You already had this ethic of community organizing and activism. Where did that stem from for you?
Yeah, my organizing actually started in the fourth grade.
Hmm.
We were parents and students were organizing around over there was called the MCAS, which is like the standardized test,
Hmm.
and we were fighting against the to not take the MCAS because we
Hmm.
didn't want it to be a test that we needed to take in order to go to the next grade. Um, and then even before that, and I think about my organizing and how I got into this is really because I always ask the question why. Like,
Hmm.
why is it that some people have and some people don't? Growing up from a single parent home, my mom is a Haitian immigrant. I had to translate everything for her. We sometimes we had it, sometimes we didn't. A lot of times we're like houseless, going from house to house, and um, the question I always asked myself was why? Why is it that some people are able to like wear Jordans to school, for example, and others aren't? Why is it that some people have more food in their lunchbox and I don't? Right? Like, why is it that some people have beautiful houses and my family's struggling? And so I think it's because of my curiosity that led me to even go into like my first protest in the fourth grade, of like, well,
Yeah.
why do we have to take this test, right? Like, what is it and why do we have to take it in order to go to the fourth grade, right? So, or go to the next grade. And so that was really where my work kind of started, I would say.
Yeah. And, having this ethic and seeing that, like, community voicing concerns about injustice can make change, like, has an impact on the way that you're going to navigate coming into a space like Florida, right? Where and Florida gets a bad rap. Some might say deservedly so, but like we have to acknowledge that this kind of legislation, these
Yeah.
kinds of overly punitive or restrictive, regressive policies are happening all across the country,
Mm.
and maybe in your municipality, or on your state level, right, wherever you are, coming into the space that's like in the early 2010s less hostile than it
Yeah.
is now, but like still pretty antagonistic towards equity, justice, liberation for Black people, right? Having the community around that, connecting to community like Power You, who we'll hopefully be highlighting soon, doing this work is so important when you're making those first connections into community, here in Florida, or where you are in
Yeah.
Florida. What was it about the community and the young people that made you say, like, yeah, this is the way that I want to move? Because there are lots of other initiatives that you could have given your energy towards. When you saw those young people in Circle, what was it about it that was like, yeah, this?
Yeah, I'm not going to mention her name, but there was a particular young person who I think at the time, so Paru organizes young people between, I think they start at 13, right? This
Hmm.
person was 8 and she had so many questions. She had
Hmm.
so many questions and she reminded me of myself. And it was those young people were Black, they were young, and they were curious. They were asking all the why questions that I asked, you know. And then there were like when there were like community meetings or they were like self-organizing meetings, like they were taking notes, they were doing kind of like they were doing icebreakers together, they were doing like sharing the talking piece. And I was like, wow, like they were like they led themselves, right?
Mhm.
um and then I would meet like other parents, right? I would meet other Black people and other parents that look just like me, right? Dark skinned Black people. And I was like, wow, this is beautiful, right? Because not so, like in the Northeast, I would say, because it's so like it's like racially diverse, like there's all sorts of people organizing, right? But at that time in Overtown, it was Black people organizing themselves, and they were self-organizing. And
Mhm.
the parents were coming, and the parents were talking about birth work, and they were talking about environmental justice work. And so um, I think that would be why I chose to stay there, right? Is because I saw myself in them.
Yeah, right. The both the intersection of, seeing a space where young people, maybe like yourself with that same energy, like are being honored,
Yeah.
and like this acknowledgement of like the intersectional nature of like our collective struggle for liberation is so important, right? Because I think a lot of the times folks can just get pigeonholed into like, restorative practices in schools so we can break the school to prison pipeline. And it's like, yeah, that's harm reductive and something that needs to happen. But that kind of harm is happening within a geography that is at severe risk for the effects of like climate change, right? Is in the intersections of like a lot of gendered violence that continues to happen, not just unique to Florida, and like making sure that those intersections of the work are honored is a challenge to do in an organizing space, because we do have to push for like specific initiatives in given moments, but to
Mm.
be in community with people who do care about like these community initiatives with an intersectional lens is so important. You continue to do restorative justice work in lots of different spaces, and I kind of want to turn it back to you to continue to tell the story of what your practices look like, because it varies and is so intersectional across a lot of the things that we just talked about.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true because since okay, so at the time I was doing it as a campaign, right? I was doing
Hmm.
restorative justice circle keeping as a community tool to get people to recruit, right? Or to get to
Hmm.
keep people engaged and to understand the practice so we can have it into the schools, right? Um, and I would say years later, we won that campaign. I was also going on a spiritual journey, a healing journey, and also around that time, I was having a lot of dreams. My ancestors would come in my dreams, and there was a particular dream that I had where I was like in the water and I was like swimming. I don't know how to swim in real life, but like I was swimming in the water and I saw a stroller and it was like, okay, you got to catch this stroller. And I was like, okay, I got to catch this baby. And it was like all these things I had to like grab, right? But I was under the water and had to like catch a bunch of things, right? Um, and so in that dream, I woke up and it was like, oh, Fanm Saj, right? Fanm Saj in Haitian Kreyol means midwife. And what we'll say is midwives catch babies, and Fanm Saj, we catch communities. So that's
Hmm.
where I am now is doing this healing work and these practices at the organization called Fanm Saj, um, where I do hold lots of different types of circles, and I get an opportunity to train people on circle keeping. But what I value or what I'm learning the most as a practitioner is that I'm not the only one, nor am I the first person that's ever done this. That this is an indigenous practice,
Hmm.
and it's even connected to our direct ancestors, right? So there's a whole ancestor in the Ifa Yoruba tradition called Obatala, and Obatala is the king of white cloth. And he is the king maker, but he's the king, but he's also the peacekeeper of all the other orishas that have traveled through Olodumare. And so the reason why I bring up Obatala is because a lot of times we're like having conversations, right? And for me, I have to like sit with myself to better understand how and what type of circle is needed, right?
Hmm.
So sometimes I'm holding circles and the process is about holding a circle to better understand a relationship, right? Sometimes it's about conflict. And a lot of times it's also there's been like a traumatic harm that's happened in the community, right? And so the variation of it always starts with, well, what has happened and what's the
Hmm.
need? What's needed to be able to move forward in a healthy way, right? But most of the time I spend and I sit before I hold a process or a circle to better understand for myself, am I actually able to hold this circle, right? Or am
Yeah.
I actually able to hold this process? And I ask a lot. I ask permission. I ask permission from my elders. I ask permission from my ancestors to know, is this something that um, will be that I can hold, right, with their support, right?
Yeah.
Um, so
What
yeah,
happens when the answer's no?
yeah. I'm very okay with the no, right? And sometimes then I have to communicate that with somebody else. And then people who don't really understand my spiritual practice, they will be like, okay, well, when can you do it? It'll be like, well, if you
Hmm.
can't do it now, if it's a no now, well, when can you? Right.
Hmm.
And then I have to respond and say, I don't know, or I can help you to identify somebody else to hold this for you.
Yeah. I mean, even outside of your specific practice, I think what you highlighted is really important about just because you have the knowledge and capability to hold a space doesn't mean that you're the right person to do it in any given situation, right? And through whatever path of discernment that you're taking, um, to reach that answer is really an important consideration. Often when we're talking to when I'm talking to folks who are learning to be restorative justice practitioners and facilitate processes like this, right? The role of co-facilitators, the role of doing this in community, the role of making sure that at the intersections of your identity,
Mhm.
right, you're not an inhibition to that process is important.
Yeah.
The importance of making sure that this work doesn't not just exist with one person
Right.
within the context of your organization, within the context of your community, within the context of your school, is so important to make sure that just because you can't, for whatever reason, you might be sick that day, right?
Right.
You might leave the organization for some reason or another. You might not be in community with that space. Like if the work just lives with one person and is not a part of the life of the community, and there are not multiple people who can hold those spaces for each other, not just to repair harm, but to heal, to connect, to
Yeah.
grow, right? You're doing yourselves a disservice in those moments of the no and trying to find others to support and collaborate with. What does that look like? How have you built communities that have, or been a part of communities that have multiple people who can carry that culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in South Florida and at Fanm Saj, we have had the opportunity actually to be able to train youth and adults to have a restorative justice ecosystem
Hmm.
for community, for schools to be able to actually be in practice with each other. And so
Yeah.
what that looks like is first they receive the training and then they meet monthly. We all meet monthly to be able to be in practice with each other. And then in the young people, we actually coach because we receive resources to be able
Hmm.
to do that, but we coach young people so that way they can hold circles in their own communities. And we stipend them. Thank God. We're so grateful to our funders to allow us to be able to resource them too, for them to consider it work, right? For them to consider it like any other type of work. Peacekeeping is
Hmm.
also and can also be work. Um, and so with adults, we provide the training and then we offer practitioner circles for people to be in practice with each other, to kind of connect with each other and to share like their skills, what they're learning in the communities that they're holding circles in, and then to come back and to share those skills with each other. And then, of course, we all stay connected with um, also our elders, right? To also like connect with folks like um, from just practice and other organizations to be able to kind of like understand how RJ and how TJ is being used and working across the country, right? Because we know that South Florida and Florida is a special place, right?
Hmm.
And we know that what we're doing works here, right? Works well here. And sometimes connecting with others helps us to grow in our wisdom, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, for sure. And there Amplifier Day is also a place where folks across the country have been able to connect and learn not best practices, but like this is my experience, this is my
Yeah.
story, this is how my community has been navigating so many of these things. And there are a handful of other collaborative or convenings that happen across, one of which is this conference that's happening at the Down South Florida Restorative Justice Conference in October, link in the description. But when we think about doing this work within your specific context, right, what have
Mhm.
some quote unquote best practices been, whether it's in the context of schools or community, or some of the things that you've seen work really well?
Yeah. So what I see that works really well for us is the consistency to be in practice. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, every month we have a particular circle that we hold, which is a sacred healing circle. And this is for Black women, femme identified folks to attend. And there's also practitioners. And then there's people who are also like, maybe they're becoming politicized or maybe not, right? But they are able to like share the guidelines, they're able to share the values, and we're able to like be in circle with each other, right? Because what I've learned is like one practice that I see or something that I see is that there are many types of circles. There's different circles happening everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's doing a circle now, right? But what makes it restorative justice is that we're holding the principles and the guidelines, right? We're holding the values, we're utilizing a talking piece, and we're holding the integrity of the indigenous culture, right? And we're giving and we're taking. So it's like a reciprocity happening in circle to create that sense of vulnerability, right? And so for me, what I see in the best practices are once we're able to like do our training in Miami and Fanm Saj is a 3 day training, 24-hour long training. Um, and this particular training allows young people to be vulnerable really quickly. It allows adults to get vulnerable very quickly because we jump in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we and in a lot of ways it gives people accessibility to each other, that they get to share sometimes something that maybe they've never shared before in their whole life, you know. At the very least of it, I remember when I first one of those first circles that I was in, that I shared something I had never shared with anyone before. But it was because of that vulnerability, that vulnerable space that was created for me to be able to like share and release and cry in front of people that I had never cried in front of before.
Yeah, you know what's inherent to restorative justice practitioner is practice.
Yeah.
Right? And when people talk about, I went to this training and then I read this book and then, I started this program in my school or in my organization, it's like, yes. And like, what is the practice that like is keeping you up is often a question that I have. People come to trainings like, what's my next art? I don't have this context where I can do this professional. It's like,
Yeah.
well, did you circle with your family, right? Did you circle with your chosen community, right? What are the ways that like you can continue to, again, like build, strengthen, as well as repair these relationships?
Yeah.
So we have this ethic of being able to say the things that we need to
Yeah.
each other, right,
Yeah.
before they become full-blown crises and like more harm is perpetuated, right? Being in the
Yeah.
practice of doing that, being in practice with people who hold these values in community are so important as you're building capacity within the context of community, right? This is coming against a culture at large, and then in Florida specifically, that is antagonistic
Yeah.
to these ways of being. How have you all navigated that?
Yeah, even yeah. So I shared with a little bit earlier that school is starting. So summer
Hmm.
is ending for many young people and for us as parents. And so for us, the way that we navigate is we stay in relationship with each other and we ask each other questions. We ask like, "What is it that you need at this time?" right? And then we create space for people to be able to answer what their needs are. And a lot of times the needs could be anything from like, I just want to just go outside and take a walk, right?
Hmm.
And I want somebody to like walk with me because I'm not feeling safe in my neighborhood. Or the need could be like, actually, I want to go like shopping because I need to like air out whatever. And then for our communities, a lot of times we have to do like mutual aid because sometimes folks can be able, they're not able to pay their light bill, or they're not able to pay. Like there's a lot of young people right now who don't have like school supplies, or their parents aren't able to afford the necessary things, right? That you would say, okay, you need to go to school, right? And so a lot of the, like, it's like the practice of circle keeping and the practice of restorative justice is like in circle, but it's also being resourceful outside of circle. So connecting folks to mental health practitioners. For us, because we understand this, we've had to build a healing justice fund to be able to raise money to ask folks to give, so that way when somebody needs like any financial support, or if they need like a practice like a Reiki practitioner or herbalist or spiritualist to guide them, right, they're able to access that. And so um, we launched that healing justice fund for that specific reason, and is growing. There are so many practitioners who are like, I'll give my time, I'll give my talent, just let me know, right? And so we're growing our network of practitioners, which allows us to connect with a large host of organizations and social justice organizations down here. Because it's like, it's one thing to be able to say, okay, I'm gonna, even for myself, right, even as an organizer, I was organizing, like it felt like I was working like 15, 16 hour days with a family and with young children.
Hmm.
And so I came out of practice, right? And so I had to like retrain myself in a lot of ways. And so what's literally the other capacity that we're building with folks, is to be able to um, say, actually, how do I take care of myself, my family, and my community, and not just uh, community, family, and self last.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important, right? To not only prevent burnout, which is often the way that this is framed,
Yeah,
but you're a whole human being who has spiritual, mental, physical, emotional needs, and those need to be honored just because,
yeah,
right?
that's
Um, so much of it is, yeah, you want to like put on your oxygen mask so you can help other people. You want to like not pour from an empty cup, but people also need to know that that internal work to heal yourself is just for you,
right.
right? So you can be the best you can be, irrespective of the work that you're doing on the day to day, whether that's organizing or not.
So yeah, what how we're doing it is, so Fanm Saj, we actually when we started, we said that we were gonna do restorative justice as an alternative to institutions. So we don't do any circle keepings in schools. We don't do circle keeping in other institutions. We do them in community. And so how it happens, most of it is word of mouth, where people are like, oh, I know folks are like, whether they're abolitionists or whether they're community folks who are just like, I want to do something different, right? They know, okay, I, Fanm Saj is doing this, right? So you guys can reach out to Fanm Saj. So reach out to Fanm Saj, and then we speak with people. We do one-on-one conversations with folks to be able to better understand like what their needs are. And in the context of like the larger kind of like institutional things that are happening, we really try our best to partner with organizations who are values aligned, because what we found is like, we're not practicing restorative justice or transformative justice because we want it to like be like advocacy, right? We are practicing it because we want to practice the new way of being now. We want to practice our ancestors' way of being now, like right now, right? We are not trying to dream of like when the world is abolition, like when there's a world with no police. We'll dream it in circle right now, right? So for us, it's like we get an opportunity to get people who come from all walks of life, right, who may have experienced like policing and may have experienced like issues in the workplace or in the schoolhouse. But most of it is like, what are the relationships that need to be strengthened in community outside of the police? What are the relationships? What are like sometimes it's like um friends, right? Sometimes it's comrades, sometimes it's parents and child. A lot of times it's like within the nonprofit world. Sometimes it could be like employee, supervisor, right? But literally, what are the infrastructures that we're building outside of the state and outside of the institutions? And a lot of people, I would say, whether they if they may vibe with it, right, or not, right? And so they get to choose. Again, we all have a choice. They get to choose if they want to ride with us, right? But we are very clear that this is the direction that we've moved into, right? So
Yeah, no, I think like that explicit statement of like this work exists outside of institutions is an important like stake to put in the ground. Like Amplify RJ doesn't make that stake, right?
yeah,
I frame that as like I'm not going to work directly with law enforcement or like with the criminal legal system, but we do work in schools because like that is an institution that I'm comfortable navigating to the extent possible, right? Like there are reasons that like restorative justice will never like fully take root in schools, no matter if you're in Florida or if you're in California, LA, right? Because
yeah,
of policies that a district, a charter network, even like a private school has, and they're like legal things around like mandated reporting, Title
yeah,
IX that like aren't necessarily conducive to restorative justice ways of being,
yeah,
right? Not to mention, like, we're all living under late stage global capitalism. And when people are in a place where they're relying on their livelihood at a check, like, you're not necessarily going to get the fullest expression of themselves. That
yeah,
being said, like, holla at your boy if you need support doing restorative justice work within the context of schools or your organizations, just not law enforcement. But,
yeah,
like, having that clear distinction for your practice, like, gives you an orientation towards, like, how is it that we can meet the needs of our community without these institutions? And when you're talking about like those mutual aid efforts, right, that's
yeah,
really helpful. Like what the this is what our society, our culture, maybe individuals, these are the needs that have been caused, these are the needs that have been created. What can
yeah,
we do within our capacity to meet those needs, right?
yeah,
Sometimes it can be framed as like what happened, who was impacted, and how,
yeah,
and whose
yeah,
responsibility is it to meet these needs, make
yeah,
things as right as possible, um, without ever necessarily like identifying like this person did this thing. It's just like,
yeah,
what does this relationship need in that moment? And that's how you're birthing communities, right? Both like building those relationships, strengthening them, and like that repair of harm process when it happens. You talked about it in the context of families, organizations. The other thing that I was like really excited to talk to you about is, you said Fanm Saj, right? Like
yeah,
the midwife, right? You've
yeah,
brought this, like, you are birthing communities, but like you are also somebody who helps like birth babies.
yeah.
How has the intersection of restorative justice with reproductive justice been a part of your journey?
So yeah, so my journey of restorative justice took me through a lot of different places. I remember going to a sister song convening, and we were in like different groups. And this was after we had started the Black Girls Matter Coalition. And I remember going there and I was like talking about restorative justice. And I was like, wow, as a parent, I knew very well, right, as a mother, as somebody who's birthed children, I knew very well the principles of reproductive justice, which is the ability to have children, not have children, and to raise your children in safe and healthy environments and for bodily autonomy, right?
Mm.
Um, and I remember going to the convening and I was like talking about restorative justice. And I was like, this is definitely a tool that I use to be able to tell stories, to be able to, at the very least, create the communities that I want my children to live in. And I remember folks being like, yeah, that's true, that's good. But it wasn't like something that was like amplified, right? That same year, I went to a conference with the Alliance for Education Justice. And I remember speaking with folks, and I was like, man, as a parent, again, that reproductive justice is something that is really important, right? Highlighting specifically my ability or my inability to raise my children in safe and healthy environments because of all these crazy policies that my young people had to face in schools, right? And so at the time, I was like, okay, telling everybody, I was like, restorative justice is reproductive justice because in order for me as a parent to raise my child in a safe and healthy environment, restorative justice is a tool to be able to do that, right? And so it felt like very organic and felt very clear, right? At the time, I was organizing, I was raising children, and so there were many things that I was doing, including um, like ability to be able to kind of reset, right?
Mm.
Reset with my own family and reset with my own communities, right? Um, I shared a little bit about how I got into the journey of Fanm Saj, but we were doing say her name rallies, we were doing protests, we were doing so many things, and I wasn't taking care of myself as a parent. I wasn't taking care of myself. I ended up in the hospital with the pulmonary embolism, and it was at that time too that I had to learn how to be a mom. I had to relearn how to be a mom. So I shared also that part of my learning was like taking care of myself was important in taking care of my family and my community. I had to reorient myself in that. Um, I also learned at that time that the Black maternal mortality rate was very high, and that each of my pregnancies, I experienced near death experiences. I had near death experiences. My first pregnancy, I had an emergency C section because of preeclampsia. My third pregnancy, I had a pulmonary embolism. Even my last pregnancy, just now, I had some different issues, right? And so each of the things that I experienced were things that I would say the medical industrial complex doesn't care about Black women. And if not for understanding restorative justice as a practice of also venegration of our ancestors, I and many people that I work with wouldn't be here, right? Because we have to take back a lot of what we've lost, including the knowledge and the wisdom that our ancestors have left around how do we take care of each other, right? So for me myself, I'm not a midwife. I am a doula. I support people in whatever, like I'm a full spectrum doula, and so I support folks in whatever care that they need. And what I also understand is that because the medical industrial complex doesn't care, then what do we need to do to prevent some, like people who want to have children? What do we need to do in order for them to prepare even way before they decide to have children or not have children? And a
Mhm.
lot of those things have to do with unpacking trauma. And when we sit in circle with folks, that's where the healing starts or continues, where people one of the first circles that I was holding was weeping circles. Because for
Mhm.
me, I was holding so much trauma in my womb and I wasn't releasing it. And that led to a lot of the traumatic births that I had. Right.
Mhm.
And so for us as practitioners, it's also being mindful that like restorative justice is reproductive justice because it gives us a tool to be able to access justice for individuals and for masses of people, right? And first to be able, because ultimately the need ultimately at any point or at some point, whoever who's responsible to meet that need, ultimately we are, right?
Mm.
In a lot of ways,
Community.
ultimately we are, and community is responsible for meeting those needs, right? And so we have to do those things within our communities, right, with each other. And so weeping circles, crying circles led to my healing. It led to many people's healing. And for us at Fanm Saj, that's one of the types of circles that we continue to hold to be able to be in vulnerability, to release with each other, and then to move into um, a space of healing and a space of growth in the community.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about what happens in those circles, confidentiality acknowledged.
Yeah, yeah. And so the reason why like I did share a little bit about the types of circles as restorative justice practitioners,
Mm-hmm.
we have to always hold the integrity of circles because there are many people doing circles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Are there many people who sit in the circle?
yeah, and then there's many
Yeah.
people who sit in a circle, and there are many people who are doing circles that are not RJ circles. And the reason why I say that is because for us as practitioners, the integrity is lies in the guidelines. So first we have to set the space, right? We have to set the space, um, and be able to allow people to speak from the heart, to listen from the heart, right? To speak with respect. And the one of the most important guidelines is to be able to hold the talking piece, right? Some people, when people come into our circles, some people have never gotten a chance to even, okay, if you get a question, if the first check-in question is how are you, some people don't even get asked that. Black women don't get asked how are you. Most of the time it's like, what is it that I can get from you, so then when you ask somebody, you've already set the guidelines, we've built collective values, we've built consensus, and then you ask them how are they. Oh my goodness, you just see tears because it's heavy, because Black women are holding so much. We're holding our families, we're holding, sure, we're just trying to hold ourselves together, right? So in our circles, we see people crying. We see people telling stories, and then we see people laying hands. We have a lot of practitioners and healers, so people are laying hands with each other and holding each other, singing with each other, and affirming each other in a lot of ways to be able to get through to the next talk, to get the talking piece to the next person, right? And so the power for us, the power of circles and the power of the talking piece to be able to listen, right, from our heart, right, and listen with respect are our guidelines and values that we hold not just inside of circle but outside of circle too, right? And so in the circles, a lot of times week by week or month by month, we have people do like candle demonstrations or Reiki or different healing tools that people could be able to have access to in their
Mhm.
own healing journeys as well.
Yeah. What's important there, well, one of the things that's important to highlight is, right, it's just being responsive to the needs. It's
Yeah,
not just asking people, like, how are you?
yeah,
Once people bare their souls to you, like, you have to be responsive to that.
yeah,
Sometimes all that's needed is to be there to hold and for folks to be seen and acknowledged. But when people are articulating needs,
yeah,
right? Physical needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs, right? The things that you can do within that space and outside of that space where you're gathered in a circle in like that particular way
yeah,
is what builds and strengthens community, allows you to be in relationship in that right way where you can ask each other for the hard things.
yeah,
um and of course, like, the healing of all this is not linear,
right,
right? People come and go from those spaces.
right,
The At the conclusion of a particular circle, not everyone's womb trauma is like 100% ready to go. Let's
right,
have this orgasmic birth, right?
right,
But um, being in practice, like as we said
yeah.
from the beginning of this conversation, is how we continue to do this work. Is there anything else that you want to highlight before we transition to the questions that everybody answers when they
Okay.
come on this podcast?
I mean, I think like as we move forward, with
Mhm.
restorative justice and being Black led, being women led, and as we move forward in the South, what I would share with folks is to center Blackness and to
Mhm.
center Black people in the South, to center Black people in Florida, because a lot of times, um, although we're doing the work, a lot of times there's a lot of erasure that happens,
Mhm.
right? I'm sure I know it happens everywhere, but Florida is a very special place, and all eyes are on Florida right now. And so elevates. I'm grateful that we were able to have this conversation, continuing to amplify our work, indigenous people, black people, and center folks who are directly impacted, right? Whether it's reproductive injustice or criminal legal system, whichever way. Listen to our stories, right? And find ways to support the leadership of these organizations like Fanm Saj, like Power U, like the Black Collective, Miami Worker Center, folks who are like down here who are really pushing the needle. Um, I would say continue to see us. We're gonna keep seeing ourselves, right? But it does matter. That is important to us. Support the leadership of Black-led organizations. In South Florida, like Fanm Saj, Power U, the Black Collective, Miami Worker Center, because so many resources are going to organizing and like kind of all eyes on Florida, right? Um, and so many resources are coming down, and at the same time, many of our work is being erased or ignored, right? And so we see the white supremacy, we see the racism, and so for folks who are listening, support these organizations, right? Because we're putting those who are directly impacted by racism, by criminal legal system, in leadership to be able to create our own way of being.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And there are resources to all of those things going to be down in the show notes. But for now, the question that everybody answers when they come on this podcast, in your own words, define restorative justice.
So, for me, restorative justice is a spiritual practice to
Mm,
be able to have folks better understand what is it that they need to be able to move forward in a healthy way. What is it that a community needs to be able to move forward in a healthy way? And it gives us an opportunity to be heard and to be able to build community outside of any institutions, whether they care for us or not. We can build it on our own.
yeah, yeah, for sure. As you've been doing this work, what has been an oh shit moment? And what did you learn from it? And it can be like, oh shit, I messed up, but it could also be like, ah shit, I did that and it was awesome.
Ah, ah, and an moment was is anytime that I don't trust my intuition. You know, when you're
Mm,
sitting in circle and you're like, you ask a question and you know the type of question that's gonna keep getting the room to keep it moving, you know? Um, that would be like any time that I didn't trust my intuition. And then oh shoot, like I did that
mm,
moment is I remember one time we were holding a circle after somebody was Philandro Casil, he was brutally murdered, and we had a circle, we had a community building circle, and there was somebody who came into circle. They weren't in the circle, they left and came back, and they came to disrupt the circle. And
mm.
they were saying really harmful things that I really don't even need to repeat now. But they were saying really um, misogynistic things that we don't need to say in circle. And so um, I don't normally do this, but in circle, I stopped it. I was like, we're
Mhm.
not doing this. This is not a space for further harm. This is a space for healing. And in that moment, it felt like folks were like, "Oh yeah, this was definitely needed." And then afterwards, I was like, "Oh shoot, I wonder what would have happened if we just let the circle go and I didn't stop it."
Yeah, the question of like when to intervene
Yeah,
in a circle is always something that is touchy, especially in a community that doesn't have like deep previously held relationships because sometimes like you'll allow that circle to take care of itself. You'll allow others in that space to say like what's happening right now isn't cool on top of like
yeah,
whatever else is going on in the process. But if it's a space where people are looking to you for leadership, for guidance as a
yeah,
facilitator, probably because they haven't had deep experience in holding space themselves, right, or being in spaces like that, like
Yeah.
that might be the calculation that you make. And
Mm.
like outside of your intuition, I don't know that there are like hard and fast rules to follow about that.
The hard and fast rule is to always listen to your own Ori.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You get to sit in circle with four people, living or dead. Who are they? What
Oh,
is the question that you ask that circle?
wow. um, I would sit with I would ask Cecile Fatima to join the circle, who is the Haitian woman who sparked the Haitian Revolution within ceremony. Um, I would ask Malcolm X to sit in circle because I would want to know the wisdom that he gained, that he was going to be sharing back after he came back from Mecca. Like I would want to hear more
Mhm.
of that, and then even connect and speak with him about Ifa. Um, and I would love to invite my mother to come in circle with Cecile Fatima and Malcolm X. And I would invite one of my children to sit in circle um, with all of us. So,
And what is the one question you ask that circle?
and the one question that I would ask is, what do we need to do to what is their take on what we need to do to shift the current conditions of capitalism, and what does wealth building and community healing and radical, like transformative, like wealth building and community healing and restorative justice, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? That would be the story that I would want to hear.
Yeah, this is my sneaky way of asking the questions that are at the core of what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Answer.
You said what?
What's your answer?
Oh, the questions that I asked.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. So, for me, it feels like it feels like I'm floating. It feels like I'm so present that I'm floating, and I'm directly connected, and I can hear and I can taste it. The tasting of it tastes like mangoes, like delicious mangoes that I just pulled off a Florida tree that is so soft and so sweet. um, and it looks like the when you're looking at the ocean, and it's like your eyes are like slowly like drifting and like looking and gazing at the ocean. And it feels free, it feels like liberation, and it feels like possible.
I guess like the follow up to that is like, how do we get there?
Yeah, so we get there by being patient with each other, by being loving towards each other. I think in our conversation, sometimes restorative justice feels so easy to do, but it's actually really hard. It's also really hard to be in circle and to sometimes there's many times there's disagreement. Many times that
Mm.
there's a hard or harsh harm that has happened that people don't know how to feed themselves their way out, right? And we get there. We don't get there by ourselves. We get there with community. We get there by being in community with people who will support us, right? Who will be like, let me dap you up, or let me high five you, or big up to you. But that those same communities have to be there to be like, man, or you messed up, or how can I support you to see it in a different way, or what does accountability look like, and asking those tough questions. So it looks like support and accountability. And we get there by staying connected to our ancestors and staying connected to understanding that the work that we're doing now is to impact the seven generations that are coming and the seven generations that have passed.
The links to connect with your work are down below. How can people support you and your work in the ways that you want to be supported?
Oh, wow. In the ways that I want to be supported. So, um, the I want people to support Fanm Saj, so you could go to our website, fanmsaj.org. I would love it if you can. You could purchase a Sacred Ori affirmation card deck. You could donate to our work. You could get involved by participating in a training or a workshop that we're doing. Follow us on Instagram.
Beautiful. And of course, like all of those things will be linked below. Thank you so much for continuing. Thank you so much for being a part of our continued series highlighting restorative justice work in the South. If you're somebody who is in the South and is interested in continuing to connect in community, the Florida Restorative Justice Association is hosting a conference this October. Links to that again in the description or show notes wherever you're watching or listening. But thank you all so much for being here and bearing witness to this transformative conversation with Ruth. We'll be back next week with someone else living this restorative justice life. Until then, take care.